reach heaven's joys, O bright and sun. Heart of my heart, whatever befall, still be my vision, O ruler of all.
Hello, and welcome again to our study of the book of Judges. You remember the last time we were together, we looked at Jephthah, and we learned some lessons that might have been unexpected. They certainly were by me. The number one lesson probably is the importance of vows. Jephthah understood it, but he was grieved by it. It hurt him to think that he was going to lose his daughter, his potential for grandchildren, because of making a reckless vow. But you also see the importance of vows in his daughter. The fact that she insisted, if that's what you've promised to God, that's what you've got to do. You've got to live up to it. I think there's a great lesson there for all of us, that we need to realize the importance of promises that we make, that when we give our word, we follow through. I know people in the world may not do that. They may deceive you, they may mislead you, they may intentionally lie to you. I don't know. But if we're going to be God's people, we need to keep our word, just like Jephthah kept his word. The other thing I notice is that a wise leader seeks peace. And we got to see that really in two different ways. First, with the people of Ammon, he recalled history. And I could add as a somewhat of a sub-thought under this, that a wise leader is well acquainted with history. In fact, Moses, when he was delivering the law the second time in the book of Deuteronomy, gave instructions for when a king would ascend to the throne, that king was supposed to make a handwritten copy of the law. What do you think the importance of that is? Well, clearly, it's know your history. Know the will of God. Know how God's dealt with His people. Now that knowledge of history was used by Jephthah in an attempt to prevent war. Didn't work, but that wasn't his fault. That was the fault of the king of Ammon. Then he also tried to seek peace through a call to remembrance. When the Ephraimites said, "You did not call us," he simply said, "Oh, but I did call you. You didn't come. We were being tormented by an enemy, and you did not come to our aid." And finally, Jephthah said, "I took my life in my own hands, and we took on the enemy." And so those great lessons stand for us, it seems to me, out of our previous lesson. Now, today, we're going to learn more about how God talks about the coming of a great judge in the land of Israel, and some very interesting facts. But before we do that, I want to point you toward something that includes a lot of interesting facts. It is a free Bible correspondence course. Take a look at this.
Gospel Broadcasting Network offers a free, non-denominational Bible course. It's based strictly on God's Word and not the creeds or traditions of men. Why not contact us for lesson number 1?
Walking in sunlight, sunlight of love. Heavenly sunlight, heavenly sunlight.
You may want to enroll by email. The address is info@gbntv.org. To enroll by phone, call us toll-free at 888-805-3390.
All right now, we're ready to look at this very special piece of information that is given to the wife of a man by the name of Manoah. Turn with me, if you will, to Judges chapter 13. Let's start at verse 1. Again, the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. I just want to pause long enough to notice this. If we went through this book and underlined every time it said, again, the children of Israel did evil, we'd have a lot of underlining to do, wouldn't we? They do it all the time. And maybe that ought to serve as a reminder to us that it's easy to stumble and go back into sin. We don't want to go there. We want to avoid that if at all possible. But now, continue. They served the Philistines for 40 years. And verse 2 tells us this. Now there was a certain man from Zorah, of the family of the Danites, whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and had no children. And the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, Indeed now, you are barren, and have borne no children, but you shall conceive and bear a son. Now, before we go any further, I want us to notice particularly here that the angel of the Lord came, and we want to observe later some pieces of information that make us really wonder if we know exactly who this angel of the Lord is. It may be a surprise to look at. But what did the angel say? Now therefore, please be careful not to drink wine or similar drink, and not to eat anything unclean. For behold, you shall conceive and bear a son, and no razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb, and he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. This may be one of the most interesting and important thoughts in the whole text of the book of Judges, and yet I don't know of any time that I've ever heard anybody bring it up. In fact, I've taught so long to people that if you've come up with something that you can't find anybody else that says it, you better be careful, it's probably wrong. And having said that so many times, I've avoided pointing this out, but I think we need to look at it. Look at what this says. We're talking now to Manoah's wife. Manoah's wife, and she is told what? She's told you're going to have a child, you're going to have a son. And it's obvious the son is going to be a Nazarite because they're never to cut his hair. He's never to eat any grapes. But what I find intriguing here is this. Be careful, and this is speaking to her, be careful not to drink wine or similar drink, and not to eat anything unclean. The Nazarite vow included the idea that you could not eat grapes in any sense. You couldn't eat grapes, you couldn't eat raisins, you couldn't drink wine. Nothing from grapes. Now watch. She is barren. That's very clearly stated by the angel. She is barren. And so in the time of her barrenness, before she conceives, she is made to begin to follow the Nazarite vow herself until the boy is born. Now, what does that seem to say? Well, if I'm understanding it right, his Nazarite vow is dependent upon his mother being under the Nazarite vow at the time of conception. If I'm right about that, then that would suggest to me, and I would suppose to you, that God considered Sampson to be his from the point of conception. Now that's powerful. That ought to make us appreciate little babies more than some people appreciate little babies. All right, she's been given this rule, and we're going to learn more about it in comparison by looking at what her husband is told later. But let's pick up at verse 6 of Judges chapter 13. Let's see what it says there. So the woman came and told her husband, saying, A man of God came to me, and his countenance was like the countenance of the angel of God. Very awesome. But I did not ask him where he was from, and he did not tell me his name. Now, she doesn't exactly know who this is. She thinks it's the angel of God, but she didn't ever ask him. And so she's not absolutely certain. We'll see more about that as we go on down. Verse 7, And he said to me, Behold now, you shall conceive and bear a son. Now drink no wine or similar drink, nor eat anything unclean, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb to the day of his death. Does God consider the child in the womb to be an actual human being? The answer is obviously within this text, yes, he does. So go ahead. Then Manoah prayed to the Lord and said, "O my Lord, please let the man of God whom you sent come to us again and teach us what we shall do for the child who will be born." And God listened to the voice of Manoah, and the angel of God came to the woman again as she was sitting in the field. But Manoah, her husband, was not with her. Then the woman ran in haste and told her husband and said to him, "Look, the man who came to me the other day has just now appeared to me." So Manoah arose and followed his wife. When he came to the man, he said to him, "Are you the man who spoke to this woman?" And he said, "I am." Manoah said, "Now let your words come to pass. What will be the boy's rule of life and his work?" So the angel of the Lord said to Manoah, "Of all that I said to the woman, let her be careful. She may not eat anything that comes from the vine, nor may she drink wine or similar drink, nor eat anything unclean. All that I commanded her, let her observe." We may not have understood it thoroughly when we read it the first time, verses 4 and 5. But when we get on down here in verses 12 through 14, it is clear. She has to keep the Nazirite vow as she prepares to conceive and carry and ultimately bear this son who will be a great servant of God. Then Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, "Please, let us detain you, and we will prepare a young goat for you." And the angel of the Lord said to Manoah, "Though you detain me, I will not eat your food. But if you offer a burnt offering, you must offer it to the Lord." For Manoah did not know he was the angel of the Lord. Then Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, "What is your name? That when your words come to pass, we may honor you." And the angel of the Lord said to him, "Why do you ask my name, seeing it is wonderful?" Now that's interesting. Later, you're going to see the baby that's going to be born. That would be Jesus, the child that would come to be king. Isaiah talks about him in Isaiah chapter 9, and he describes Jesus. One of his names is Wonderful, Counselor, Almighty God, or Everlasting God. See, Jesus is God. There's no doubt about that. He bears the same description as God bears. Wonderful is a part of His name. He is God come down to earth. Of course, right now, the angels just said, "My name is Wonderful." It's a marvelous thing. And so Manoah took the young goat with the grain offering and offered it upon the rock to the Lord. And he did a wondrous thing while Manoah and his wife looked on. It happened as the flame went up toward heaven from the altar. The angel of the Lord ascended in the flame of the altar. When Manoah and his wife saw this, they fell on their faces to the ground. When the angel of the Lord appeared no more to Manoah and his wife, then Manoah knew that he was the angel of the Lord. And Manoah said to his wife, "We shall surely die because we have seen God." I think the conclusion that Manoah draws is the right one. Only God can accept worship. It is offered to Him and He goes up in the sacrifice. Manoah recognizes who this is. The angel of the Lord in the Old Testament appears to me to be God, but not God in the sense of the Father, but instead God in the sense of the Son. If you go, for example, earlier to the book of Exodus chapter 3, you see Moses at the burning bush. And what is he required to do in the presence of the angel of the Lord? Take your shoes off your feet, for the place where you're standing is holy ground. What makes it holy? Well, God's holy. Peter talks about that in 1 Peter chapter 1. And so the angel of the Lord must be God, because the place where He is holy. Furthermore, if you read closely in that Exodus 3 text, you'll see Him called not just the angel of the Lord, but also He's called the Lord, and He's called God. A clear reference to the fact that this angel of the Lord is a messenger from the Godhead itself. And I propose to you that a careful study of the Old Testament will make us pretty thoroughly be convinced that that angel of the Lord is the pre-incarnate Jesus. It's Jesus before He came to earth, in other words, to live among men. So, He's concerned. We've seen God. We're going to die. That's His worry. But verse 23 of chapter 13 of Judges, his wife responds to that. But his wife said to him, "If the Lord had desired to kill us, He would not have accepted a burnt offering and a grain offering from our hands, nor would He have shown us all these things, nor would He have told us such things as these at this time." So the woman bore a son and called his name Sampson. And the child grew, and the Lord blessed him. And the Spirit of the Lord began to move upon him at Mahaneh Dan, between Zorah and Ashtaol. So this young man, dedicated even before birth, dedicated to the Lord, this young man, now taking his Nazirite vow, is going to be used by God. His parents do not know that some of his actions, in fact, these very next actions, are taken because of the Spirit of God. They're taken because God wants him to have an opportunity to discipline the Philistines and ultimately to cause them to be driven out. So, chapter 14 opens this way. Now Samson went down to Timnah and saw a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. So he went up and told his father and mother, saying, "I've seen a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore, get her for me as a wife." Then his father and mother said to him, "Is there no woman among the daughters of your brethren, or among my people, that you must go and get a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines?" And Samson said to his father, "Get her for me, for she pleases me." But his father and mother did not know that it was of the Lord, that he was seeking an occasion to move against the Philistines. For at that time, the Philistines had dominion over Israel. So, get me this wife. Get me this woman from among the Philistines. And you can see that that's greatly distressing to Samson's parents, both his mother and his father. What they don't understand is that God is actually going to use this as an opportunity to begin to deal with these Philistines who've had dominion over His people for this period of time. And so, in verse 5 of chapter 14, the story continues. So Samson went down to Timnah with his father and mother and came to the vineyards of Timnah. Now to his surprise, a young lion came roaring against him. And the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and he tore the lion apart as one would have torn apart a young goat, though he had nothing in his hand. But he did not tell his father or his mother what he had done. Then he went down and talked with the woman, and she pleased Samson well. After some time, when he returned to get her, he turned aside to see the carcass of the lion. And behold, a swarm of bees and honey were in the carcass of the lion. He took some of it with his hands and went along eating. When he came to his father and mother, he gave some to them, and they also ate. But he did not tell them that he had taken the honey out of the carcass of the lion. So, most of us have heard this story since childhood. Samson and his mother and father are going down to Timnah to make the arrangements. Now, what we may not understand is, in that era, making the arrangements meant that they would give a dowry to the family of the woman who was going to become the bride of their son. So there's a payment made and a covenant that is formed. And that covenant is a binding contract. We need to remember that. Of course, as they're on their way, he's attacked by a young lion. And Samson kills him with his bare hands, showing now that great strength that God gave him. Later, when they return to get his wife, when they go back for the for the great wedding feast that was going to take place, Sampson turns aside to see the lion and finds honey inside the lion. He takes some, eats it himself, gives some to his parents, but his parents don't know he killed the lion, and they don't know where the honey came from because he did not tell them. And that will play a significant role in the next part of the story. Verse 10, so his father went down to the woman, and Sampson gave a feast there, for young men used to do so. Now it happened when they saw him that they brought 30 companions to be with him. Then Sampson said to them, let me pose a riddle to you. If you can correctly solve and explain it to me within the 7 days of the feast, then I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothing. But if you cannot explain it to me, then you shall give me 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothing. And they said to him, pose your riddle, that we may hear it. So he said to them, out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet. Now, for 3 days, they could not explain the riddle. And I don't know how you are with puzzles, but I can tell you when I get a puzzle going in my mind, I can imagine 3 days being worried all the time, thinking all the time about what is the answer? What is the answer? What is the answer? These fellows, 3 days, could not figure out what the answer to the puzzle was. So, in verse 15 of chapter 14 of Judges, we find the next thing that happened. And it came to pass on the 7th day that they said to Samson's wife, entice your husband that he may explain the riddle to us, or else we will burn you and your father's house with fire. Have you invited us in order to take what is ours? Is that not so? Then Samson's wife wept on him and said, you only hate me. You do not love me. You've posed a riddle to the sons of my people, but you've not explained it to me. And he said to her, look, I've not explained it to my father or my mother. So should I explain it to you? Now she had wept on him the 7 days while their feast lasted. And it happened on the 7th day that he told her, because she pressed him so much. Then she explained the riddle to the sons of her people. So the men of the city said to him, excuse me, on the 7th day, before the sun went down, what is sweeter than honey, and what is stronger than a lion? Well, they got it right, but how did they get it? I guess you and I'd say they cheated. They pressed his bride until she finally cried enough on his shoulder that he told her the answer to the riddle. And then they gave it to him. And so he has a response to that. And it's one that may not be very flattering to his future bride or to his bride, but it's what he said. He said to them, if you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle. In other words, I know where you got the answer because I only told one person. And that one person had to be the one that told you because I sure didn't tell you. There's a message here. It's not just about wives. In fact, it's not really about wives at all. It's about learning to be careful about who you share your secrets with. I don't mean secret sins. Those obviously have to be taken to God. Those have to be confessed so that we can be forgiven. That's what John talks about in 1 John chapter 1, verses 7 through 10. I'm talking about things that are important to you that you don't want everyone to know. You need to be careful about who you tell those things to. You need to be certain that the person you confide in is a person who can be relied upon, a person who will keep your secret and only reveal it if you give them permission. But then there's another thing for us to think about here, and I believe it may be more important for us. And that is when someone tells you something that is their secret, don't tell anyone else. Don't feel compelled to spread the news. It's not our place. The secret belongs to the person who trusted us. We need to be a people who can be relied upon. Folks need to know that when we say something, we mean it. If I say, yes, I can keep your secret, surely I need to mean it, and I need to follow through and carry it out. All of us need to be sure to be the trustworthy people. Unfortunately, Samson's wife was not trustworthy. So, what did Samson do? What was his response? Verse 19, then the Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily, and he went down to Ashkelon and killed 30 of their men, took their apparel and gave the changes of clothing to those who had explained the riddle. So his anger was aroused, and he went back to his father's house, and Samson's wife was given to his companion, who had been his best man. Well, Samson was given the opportunity. Remember, that's what we learned in the text, that his parents did not know that this was going to be an opportunity to begin to deal with the occupiers, with the Philistines. That's exactly how it works out. It made Samson angry. I'm not sure that he understood how this was all going to play out. But God was using it in order to bring about and ultimately the end of the Philistine rule in that part of the world. And Samson is playing a role in bringing that to a conclusion. But then notice in his anger he went away. It may be a good idea for all of us to be sure to turn aside when we're angry. We might not control what we do. I'm not quite sure that Samson's anger is in complete control because of all the men he killed, but that was what God needed done. What I do know is that his walking away is a good lesson, even if that wasn't the purpose for him. And that is, I need to be careful about my anger. All of us get angry at times, but we need to make sure that we are angry and do not sin, as Paul talked about in Ephesians chapter 4. So Samson went back home. His bride's given to his best man. It looks like the story is totally finished, but it's not. The reality is that Samson still counts her as his bride. Remember, I told you a contract was made. This was a contractual arrangement. I told you that Samson's parents gave some sort of dowry to the family of this young woman so that they would give her in marriage to their son. They broke the contract when they gave away his bride. No assumption should have been made, but the father did assume, and it proves to be a very costly assumption, not just for him, but also for many more of the Philistines. And Lord willing, we'll talk about that in our next lesson.